Hello, welcome to another episode of My Dog Will Eat My Face. For those amongst you who have listened to this podcast for however long it's been around, I deeply thank you for staying with me throughout these years as I deal with this medical issue. It's been rather forlorn, and it's difficult to say week after week sometimes that, well, life sucks. And then the next week, same thing, life still sucks. But today is going to be different for you if you're a listener for a longer time. If you're a new listener, you'll enjoy it just as well. But today will not be more of the same because I unfortunately took a severe diversion in my course of medical history to the worst state I've probably been in within my entire life. And it is actually now, for the first time, I am beginning to feel a weight above me, almost like the pendulum that Poe once wrote of, swinging closer and closer to me in the darkness. And now it is so close, I could feel the wind change around my body as it swoops by back and forth, or I can tell it's so close if I were to pierce my lips even and make them stick out in a millimeter or two, I risk a very nasty cut from this said pendulum to where it is that close and has been lowered dangerously close to my body to do its horrific duty of essentially disemboweling me in this environment. Now, if a lot of you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably thinking, my God, this guy is a nutter. He needs a sandwich board or something to talk on, or talk from and sell pencils to people on the street. I'm actually referring to Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Pendulum, where in it a man is awoken, restrained to a table flatly, and above him, inside of a dark room where he couldn't even see his hand in front of his face, swung terribly from left to right, a incredibly uh, vicious blade that was lowered slowly closer and closer to his body. to where he had nothing to really do but sit in the dark, not really knowing the speed of this pendulum, but just wait for it to lower itself more and more until it strikes and eviscerates him. Lovely poem, isn't it? Our good friend Edgar was a bit whimsical with macabre, I'm afraid. But, needless to say, this sort of mirrors how I feel today with respect to my illness and where I'm at. I feel like the pendulum in my darkness that has so far kept itself safely away in the dark is now so close I can almost smell the iron of the blade as it passes over my nose and feel the hairs of my body whisk as the air swooshes when it's so close to cutting me in half. And why do I feel that way? This day was, needless to say, problematic. I will tell you all about it. But the short version is oh no, I'm approaching my time to leave this world forever. And it's getting so close to where it's now menacing me. Even as I sit here and speak to you, I can feel it in my lungs and in my heart. Physically, I can feel it. Forever seemingly taunting me, so I get no respite again, as it, being my pendulum, swooshes closer and closer to my body. Now, I understand that was a rather dramatic introduction, a little macabre, I'm certain, but I will, pardon me, I will explain why I felt it necessary to start the podcast with such a tone. The events of today were supposed to be simple, just another Friday, but my disease reality had other plans for me that has put me into a very terrible position of imminent demise. You see, I awoke probably around 8 a.m., and I urinated like a person normally does when they wake up in the morning, normal amount. And I had been feeling throughout this week before this day that I was accumulating a large amount of fluid in my body, and I decided that I would try to really take off that water weight by using my rhinoceros sized dosage of diuretics that are prescribed to me by my cardiologist to keep the swelling and water weight down. Because you see, as your heart fails and gets weaker and weaker, it can no longer pump uh, blood to the appropriate areas of the body. So once your heart is so weak, your organs start to starve for nutrients and oxygen and health. But as your heart continues to slowly weaken, the symptoms just get worse. You see, it is not unlike Poe's pendulum. Not at all. But alas, I did urinate and decided to take my diuretics to get that water weight off and lay down. I figured that if I lay down and keep my heart and my rest of my body at the same level, it's easier to remove the excessive fluid on me. 10:30 a.m. came to pass, when at such point I had relieved myself of no fluid whatsoever, which was alarming because based on the dosage of the diuretics that I took, I should have by then 2 hours certainly expelled at least, and little bit more likely, 1 full liter of fluid, whereas I was unable to go whatsoever. This brought to me great alarm. This told me that there was a significant change in my body between last night and this morning. Something bad has happened. My body normally would respond to this event that I've done for many years now to get the water weight off. The way it responded was completely the antithesis of the way it would normally respond. That is, it was just mute and unresponsive and unresolving. I knew instantly my body was having a problem. I knew instantly this was a serious issue. It's amazing when you get that feeling, when you know your body well enough, or if you're suffering from a chronic disease, and you kind of get into a pattern. You get into like, well, if this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do that. And you sort of have a problem and answer dialect with the various symptoms of this disease, even if it gets worse. Generally, you'd have to merely escalate the severity of these actions to mitigate the symptoms. And you kind of get into that routine, and that's where I was for a long time, to be frank. But when my body had not released any fluid, when normally Again, it should have released over a liter, certainly. I just knew. I just knew in my heart of hearts that something terrible was wrong with my body. And I placed a call to my hospice provider seeking emergency assistance because it seemed to me that now my body was not responding at all to my diuretics, which meant the fundamental means to treat my heart failure, that is, to keep the excessive volume of fluid off my body so it doesn't drown me in my own fluid. Seemed like those diuretics stopped working suddenly altogether. Again, something terrible had happened. So, what was it? Well, I had to wait a long time to get a nurse out to see me in the first place. That was frustrating. Finally, though, around 2:30 p.m., the nurse showed up, and by that point, I still had not produced a solitary twinkle of urine to expel this excessive fluid from my body. So, she felt my uh, bladder. She said it doesn't feel like it's full, so she doesn't think a catheter would be necessary. A catheter would merely, if you don't know what a catheter is, what are you doing listening to this channel? Um, the catheter just goes in through the sexual organ into the bladder and relieves any fluid in the bladder out into a bag or like a tub, if you like. Um, and it's quite miserably uncomfortable, especially for a man, because they have to insert it all the way through from the tip to the back and get it all the way into inside your bladder and open up a balloon so it doesn't fall out, drain the fluid. And if you ever have gone through surgery for a long period of time, you probably had this and you just didn't know it. Because that's how they make sure you don't just pee yourself while you're under surgery. They put in a catheter so it's not an issue. All the pee just comes out and goes into a happy little bag. Anyway, she said that it didn't feel like it was warranted because there were there was not much fluid felt there, which means, my good friends, that the problem is higher than the bladder. It means that the kidneys are no longer working. So she said, "Do you want to do the catheter anyway, just to be sure?" At first, I said no, because I hate them. They're terrible, they're intrusive, and not a very good carnival ride, I would say. There are some people into them, but I'm not going to talk about that. I at first said no, but then I looked down at my little dog and he was looking up at me with his big brown eyes, with a concerned, thoughtful look right in my eyes. And I thought, never mind, I'll take the catheter because then I'll know for sure what it is. I owe it to my little guy here to do that for him. Because if it can relieve just some of the fluid, it's worth it for the little man who looked longingly into my eyes. So we did it. We got into position. She did the tango. She she inserted the catheter, and my dog, who he's an emotional support animal, and boy is he a good emotional support animal. He came up right to my like shoulder area and my face and held me and cuddled me during the process to help keep me calm. And my God, talk about an excellent support animal. He's so good at what he does. Anyway, so she's tinkering with it. She checks the catheter. She's done. And I ask her, well, what came out? And that's when she said, absolutely nothing. It was as dry as the goby. And as I said, that means the kidneys aren't working. And it was completely empty, not a drop. So that means the kidneys weren't working at all. And this is now at 2:30 in the day. I'd taken diuretics to try to force fluid out of my body, and all day I was intaking various fluids as I would eat and drink throughout the day. Probably at least 1,400 milliliters of fluid I had at that point taken in because now it's like 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. And so there was no lack of input, so to say. But the kidneys didn't filter any of it. Nothing. Zero. The bladder was empty. So, as I said already, it means the kidneys are failing at a very alarming rate. At this point, a rate of 100%. It's now been about 14 hours since I woke up and had my first uh, output of the day, but not a single drop since. So to me, that is just frankly devastating. In hospice, there is no dialysis because I'd be treating a disease. Basically, what I am looking at, is a defunct and kaput kidney pair that are not filtering fluids unable to get to the things in my body. And think about it right now, everything that was in my body yesterday, or at least at some time pretty far back, are still there. Every dead virus a T cell of mine killed, every toxin, every mineral that my body didn't want, anything has not left my body. As that recirculates and gets worse and worse with all my organs, they all will then begin to fail as well, is what my nurse said. The best hope, she said, was to drink just simple water during the day, because water and only water, nothing else, has a osmotic interaction with the retained fluid outside the body's blood vessels. So if you drink a bunch of water and it circulates there through your vessels, there is a small chance that this osmotic relationship will help kind of shave off and bring in a little bit of that retained external fluid outside of the circulatory system and make it to the kidney to do something, hopefully, and to the bladder and to pee. And it's not an aggressive thing. It's like it's be sort of like if I were to wait a week and not shave, and then decide to shave and go in there with a disposable razor and decide to do it by going with the grain. It would take me forever to shave. Just whisk, 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 whisk. But that's sort of what I imagine this osmotic relationship is. As the water passes by in the vascular system, the retained water that's just sitting there and not doing anything kind of gets shit might get shaved off from this osmotic effect and land in the kidneys for processing and dumping out the body. That's really the only option I have right now. While my body just continuously recycles and recirculates the same crap that was in it just the day before and the day before that, and so on. And that's when I get to look forward to all of the organs eventually starting to fail due to improper nourishment and a slow, terrible demise. So that sort of killed my Friday and weekend plans. Why does this always happen? Things like this, dram- drama or issues come up Friday afternoon, like on the dot. Never on Monday. It's Friday afternoon, right before the weekend. Always when these things come up and screw up all your plans. And I'll tell you, experiencing full on kidney failure for the first time on a Friday is just a real buzzkill. It's very insensitive to my schedule, and I will pen a complaint about that to someone, somewhere, for sure. But that's about all I'll be able to do. Anyway, so have a good weekend. Did you really think I would end the podcast on that note? No, I'm not so insensitive. Um, I still have to thank all of you dearly for listening to the podcast and these words. I started this project years ago with the intent of recording an audio journal for my friends and family so that they can listen in at any time to hear my voice and my thoughts, and also to share this battle with congestive heart failure, now kidney failure, with the world, and come of it whatever may. It's had its moments where I felt it did me a lot of good emotionally. It did some other people some good. I heard. That's wonderful. Other times it was rather dry and, oh, what's the word? Felt like we were just waiting on the sideline for the bus that's never going to come. Because I am apparently a stubborn SOB who doesn't like to die when he's been told to die at this time. So I apologize for that. It takes away some of the grit and the excitement of the journey, doesn't it? But it's authentic. None of this was recorded for really any other intent. But I do thank you all for giving me a venue to share my voice and these thoughts. And I deeply thank you sincerely for that. Because having some sort of outlet to express my thoughts, to journal these things, has helped me immensely. I know today's podcast was dark, a little macabre, as I said, but it's real. It's what I'm going through. And because of what I gained through self reflection within this podcast, I have gained insight and understanding and changed even a lot of my view and understanding of life and the universe, and to appreciate what we have, how tender it is, how precious it is, and how unlikely it is to exist in the first place, and how unlikely it is to exist for any period of time. Despite these challenges and what I'm facing, I can sit back and reflect and feel complete peace with how I go whenever and whichever way I am disposed of. I am in an unmovable position of having had lived a full life. Truly, a life with so much in it, good, bad, and the otherwise. How unlikely that was to occur. How lucky I am to have had that full life. And no force in heaven or hell can take away the fact that I had a full life. And that reflection that I did gain actually through this podcast is precisely what's giving me peace and comfort right now, despite the things I faced. Happy is the man, and happy he alone, he who, secure within himself, can say, tomorrow do thy worst, for I lived today.